Hello and welcome to another episode of Project Sanity. We are currently broadcasting at on Project Sanity's channel, so thank you for joining us here. And we've been doing lots of big things here. I've been kind of out and about and back for a bit now, and so I just wanted to re-mention some of the things that have been happening recently. We had a Jill Stein press conference that was covered, and Brandon sat down with Jamu Barak in New York. And also we had Eric, who met with former Green Party presidential candidate earlier this week as well. And so those were all some really great stuff, and we're working on something big coming up at the end of the month. So make sure you're staying tuned, you subscribe, you like, you share, to make sure that everybody gets to know as soon as we know when everything's all lined up, and we'll be ready to give you more information as that comes along. Today, we've got a great show. We're actually going to be talking a lot about education, and to speak with us about that, we have Erin Jones, who is currently running for Washington State's superintendent position, and she finished first in a field of 9 people with a little over 25% of the vote out of over a million voters. So pretty big election, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. As well, before that, we have Dave, who's put together a piece from a protest that was out in Beverly Hills, where Hillary Clinton was fundraising. It had a couple different elements that came in place, and so I'll let Dave, if he's almost ready, be able to come on. Also, I'm going to have Eric with me as well today, co-hosting. But Dave, if you want to come on and introduce your piece quickly, and then we can move on from there.
Sure, absolutely. Hey, Richard, how are you? Welcome back, my friend. Good to see you again, back in the host chair, leading Project Sanity here on a Thursday night. And yeah, we've had a couple of big weeks here. A lot of stuff happening for this grassroots volunteer network of folks. And the big news that we're working on, we're hoping to have some news to give out tonight, but we don't know if we haven't really confirmed anything. So we're doing the 10-minute rule, and we're gonna make sure that we have all the right information before we put it out to you guys. But some of the things that we're covering, and we're going to get into a little bit of the news with regards to some of the things that we were going to talk about today. I think we're going to opt for talking a little bit about the Our Revolution stream that happened, and the outcome of that, and the what's going to happen beyond now. Basically the end of the finality of the Bernie Sanders campaign and what we do beyond. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But on Monday, Hillary Clinton was here in Los Angeles. She was at a couple of fundraisers actually, in Beverly Hills, and one of them was at Haim Saban's house, a billionaire who is very pro-Israeli. He's one of the Democrat billionaires. There's Republican billionaires as well. So this is a bipartisan issue with support for the Israeli government, and they never seem to question what the government does to the Palestinian people as a party, either party. So this protest was put together by Lawrence Steiner of Our Revolution LA now, and another group from Beverly Hills, which I'll have the name for you when we get back. Trying to rush around today, so I'll have that for you when we're done with the video. But I streamed the entire event. It was a march and a rally in Beverly Hills to stand on the corner and hopefully get Hillary Clinton's motorcade to see that people were protesting her support, her blind support for Israel and their policies of occupation and so forth. So let me bring this up for you guys, and we'll check it out.
Especially since she's having her fundraiser at the particular spot that she's having it.
This movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, is one of the greatest, most important movements since the anti-apartheid movement against the regime in South Africa.
Hillary Clinton, Palestinian human rights are not for sale. And no matter how much cash you receive this evening to shield Israel's inhumane policies against the Palestinian people and to violate our constitutional right to boycott, we, the people, will not yield. because like Palestinian human rights, we are not for sale.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free.
Now, I just was charged with a felony, and now I can't vote. You know what I mean? Like let's look at what they're doing to us. And Hillary Clinton is calling black children super predators. So in the eye of her and her family and everyone else, we are super predators. So all I'm asking is that we stand together, that we mix these both communities and learn that this right here, it won't be done unless we unite, unless we fight back together. Because as you can see, they're an occupied territory. Like, this is an occupied territory right now, right? They are surrounding us, and there's not that many black folks here, right?
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine!
We are here to say Bernie Sanders' new group, Our Revolution, is, like I said, it's not about Bernie, it's about the issues. And one of the issues that he stands for and that we all stand for is Palestinian human rights. So we're here to tell her, not that she's going to listen, but we're here to tell her that she needs to listen to the people and not the billionaires, and to support Palestinian human rights.
Long live Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
We will not sit idle while billions are poured into a campaign based on promises of destruction and war across the entire Middle East. We will not be silent when Palestinian families are being ripped apart by apartheid and continually bombed and starved of economic development. Hillary stands for war, and we stand for justice.
BDS! 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 BDS!
Excellent piece there, Dave.
So the BDS, of course, is the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, which was a technique that was used during the apartheid South African regime to bring it down. And there are currently a number of ballot measures across the country, one particularly in California, that are attempting to effectively stifle free speech with regards to this topic by making it illegal to criticize Israel, and that any company that wants to do business with the state of California, in particular this bill we're talking about, would have, if they're going to over $100,000, they'll have to sign a document that says that they will not criticize Israel, or they'll lose the contract. So it basically, we have laws on the books that cover discrimination and hate speech and all of it. So we don't need another law. So this is clearly a law that is trying to squelch free speech and chill free speech. And it's AB 2844 here in California. And one of the things that these activists want people to do at this point, because it looks like it's going to pass, and because both sides, like I said, this is a bipartisan issue, and both sides are going to get it passed. And so activists are asking for people to fax Jerry Brown at 916-558-3160 to try to stop him from signing AB 2844 in chilling free speech in criticism of Israeli practices, which is essentially what this law is going to do.
Yeah, and there's been, I was familiar, I know on my campus it was a big issue as well, and it's interesting to see the various reactions, and as you mentioned, it's a bipartisan issue, and I think it speaks to a larger issue that we see among voters of our politicians representing some of us, but not, I think, a lot of us that have larger issues going on, and then also the information gap with voters not being informed or very well aware of the negative side effects of what we've been promoting or allowed to be promoted in Israel in our name.
Well, to the tune of $8 million a day. Now, I mean, Jill Stein talks about this, she's criticized for her criticism of Israel and her support of the BDS movement. But she also supports cutting off Saudi Arabia. And this, we need to cut all of these guys off that are clearly breaking international law. And on the face of it, it's the lobby and the very small percentage of very loud people that control our government on some levels with the lobbying efforts for Israel. So there was local media there, no national media. There were some local coverage on every station really, which was surprising to me. But just locally, nothing nationally.
Yeah, dissent is getting, I think, squelched unless it happens around the topics that the media has decided are the hot topics for the day or week or news cycle. And I think the information getting out has suffered as a result. And those are the types of things I'd actually like to hear a discussion about, not whether the 43% is really 43% or if it's closer to 40% or 46%. And I could care much less about the horse races and a lot more about the issues and what we're going to do about them and what's being done and what are the details that we're not really well aware of that might change the actual flavor of what's happening versus what we're being presented on the surface.
Right. Well, it's I find it interesting, just to sort of make it a roundabout turn to elections, that Donald, the issue of Donald Trump reaching out to African American voters. He's going to 98% white towns in Michigan to do it. But here we saw a Jewish community, for the most part, in Beverly Hills, an organization by white Jewish activists, pro-Palestinian activists, and being visited by Jasmine Abdullah and Black Lives Matter and the African American community in solidarity. And Jasmine said it, we have to stand together because the issues are the same. And, it's up to us to get the information out and hopefully make a difference. So.
Yes, and they're definitely built off the same framework in which, figuring out how to dismantle or to upset one will give us insight towards the other. And so I think it is definitely important towards that. And it's also, I think, important to keep in mind that the suffering that we feel individually, is always going to be closest to us, that there's a lot of suffering going on around the world and in a variety of places, and that rather than just suffer separately, we can work together in order to try to reduce that suffering overall for all of us. And I think that's an important idea for us to.
Well, it's a must, and it's all tied together. I mean, it's water rights in Israel, it's Flint, Michigan. Jasmine speaks about Watts. The water in Watts is bad. People can't live there, right there, a few miles away from where we were because of the water. So it's all connected, and that's really what I think our revolution hopefully will stay connected, the people, even though the leader has disappointed us or whatever, or wherever you are in that realm. But staying connected as the people working together on the issues, I think, is what's critical. So absolutely. Yes. And thanks for letting me share the piece.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I'll get Eric on here. I think he's going to be helping me a lot today. So give Dave a minute to put that together. And once that's ready, just welcome Eric. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Project Sanity. Been busy, working quite a bit, I've noticed. Been trying to put together some packages. You were just yesterday for our special live presentation of Our Revolution that you can find on the channel. You were down in Olympia at an event, and you were able to both speak with some folks that had attended and then also capture the audience reaction a little bit and just experience. So if you want to share a little bit about how your experience was down there, I think that would be a good jumping off point for us to just discuss this briefly.
Yeah, so I think it was pretty interesting. I think I received it a little bit differently than the audience did, to be honest. So I think I'll talk about the audience reaction. It seemed like the audience was there to be involved, but they didn't seem overly interested. It was different than any other Bernie event that I had been to. Normally when we would go to these Bernie events, you would see people overly excited from the beginning. You could just feel the energy in the air. And although there was a decent turnout, especially considering this is a fairly small community, I was still rather disappointed in the way people reacted. There were a few instances, however, where people got excited, especially when Bernie brought up the Washington initiative on carbon tax and supporting that, which obviously in Olympia, Washington, you're going to get support for that because it is a Washington initiative. From a personal standpoint, however, I was very impressed about a lot of things, and other things I wasn't so impressed about. one thing that Brandon and Adair both talked about in our live coverage of the event was hoping that Bernie would reach outside of the Democratic Party and support progressives from throughout the country, regardless of what party that they belong to. I didn't really see much of that, but some of the things that I did like was the fact that he didn't make this about the presidential race. He strictly made this about initiatives and down ballot candidates. And I was actually pretty happy he didn't bring Weaver out, because I think that would have caused a lot of controversy.
Yeah, I think it would have been a controversial thing, but for me personally, I think from what I've been able to gather, both from reporting around in various papers and from my own experience with participating in the capacity I did with the campaign as a volunteer, just in general, not directly with the campaign, it seemed to me that the concerns around the digital presence were legitimate, but I think also Weaver does have some of like the diehard spirit that we saw in Bernie's campaign about not caving in to the establishment as early as many people were asking. So I have some appreciation for Weaver, and I think he might have been more entertaining than some of the folks that were on stage. But I think that's really one of the tough realities that we're confronting with the political landscape as it is, which is getting people engaged in the process, making it seem important for them to participate, finding out what power they're handing over to whom and why it matters. And I think the people not necessarily being as charismatic or photogenic or whatever it may be to appeal on on the type of stages that we're more used to, I think is an unfortunate reality. But at the same time, my overall impression of the Our Revolution was, I'm glad that they were focused on issues, though I am concerned about the structural aspects of it. Again, and just another reality of when you're trying to form a movement like this, trying to coalesce different groups based on the way that our laws are written now and the loopholes that currently exist, it's hard to form organizations that meet the expectations I think a lot of us have, but then also to make them function in the ways that we would imagine that they should be able to. But as a result of trying to eliminate corporate influence, we've often silenced our own voices when it comes to trying to collectively contribute resources towards a common goal.
Yeah, I agree. I think the importance of this is keeping people together, and I think the feelings that people had would be a different thing all along the spectrum. I think some people felt that it was a genuine thing. I think some people think that it's just a way to get people to vote for down ballot Democrats. But regardless of how you feel, I think that it's very important to keep people involved, keep people interested, and keep fighting. And I actually got to talk with Tamborine Borelli, who's very active with Election Justice USA, and she was actually a candidate for state senate here. And she had a few seconds here with us last night, and I think that it would be great if we could show that, and I think Dave's got it set up for us, and so we'll just go to that real quick and see what she had to say.
A lot of the times you can have your finger on the pulse by how you feel about a thing, you know, because that really is, most of the times it's the truth. You know, you can say one thing, but when you feel another, the feeling, how you feel in your heart is the truth. And I've been feeling that feeling ever since the day that Bernie Sanders, who is the one that ignited the passion within me, and I'm sure everyone else who's watching, the day that he did whatever he had to do. Tonight, I'm feeling a little lackluster. I don't know how many people know, but in regard to the fact that it was said that Jeff Weaver was not going to be a part of this organization, and 8 out of the 13 staffers, who were everything from programmers to main bloodline to this revolution, they were very adamant that he was not going to be associated with this organization. They did not agree with many things of how he ran the campaign, and also the fact his vision and where he wants to take this in conjunction with and associated with multinational corporations. It just does not, it is not the heart and soul of what ignited us in the first place. That is not a grassroots move to do that. So 8 out of those 13 walked out. The beautiful thing is that enough of us are awake, enough of us are taking responsibility for that vision, and no disrespect to Bernie, because for as long as I breathe on this planet, I will be forever indebted and grateful to that man for waking me up. But now, since we're awake, now what are we going to do? So what we're going to do, and many of us have different ways we're expressing that. We have a multi-coalition right now being organized for an anti-TPP write-in campaign, about 20 of us candidates. That more on that later, I'll give you details, but just to give you an insight that we're not going back to sleep. There is a day of action being planned. On another note, I'm working exclusively with Election Justice USA. I'm on their leadership team, and we are planning a nationwide day of action for election integrity to press all of the different counties within the state to go and move to a hand-counted paper ballot system.
All right. And there you saw Tambourine Borelli from the live event that Eric was at. Now, I do want to get to Erin because she is very busy person and has to get going. Just to wrap that up, I think one of the really important things that Tambourine captured a bit in her sentiment, and other people I've heard already, is that whether you believe that the Our Revolution organization itself is genuine and sincere and is going to be functional and helpful and is going to accomplish what we're after or not, the sentiment within our population that it's capitalizing on and trying to either capture and divert, if that's your opinion, or to genuinely push forward is real and important, and that if we work on these relationships and build these relationships with each other on the individual level and don't count on a top-down organization explaining to us how we can coordinate and how we can do all those types of things, that I think we'll be able to move forward regardless of whether this particular organization is what we think it is or isn't. And so with that, I want to welcome candidate for Washington Superintendent, Erin Jones. And so thank you, Erin, and just make sure to unmute yourself, and we'll be happy to have you come on and tell us a little bit about how things are going in your neck of the woods.
So first of all, thanks for having me today. The whole Palestinian conversation really resonates for me. I was just telling a story yesterday. I grew up, people judge a book by its cover, and when you see this 6-foot-tall African-American woman with an afro, people make assumptions about who I am and where I come from. And I was telling people yesterday that I grew up in the Netherlands, social democracy. We had 72 languages spoken in my school. And the day that I knew I was going to change the world is when I decided I was going to solve the Middle East crisis. And I was 9 years old. And there was a little girl in my class, and her dad was the Israeli ambassador, and the little boy next door, his dad was the PLO ambassador. And as a 9-year-old, I made a conscious choice. I'm going to learn to speak Arabic and Hebrew because I wanted to be part of the solution. And so I love what you're talking about, those relationships. And I think, the greatest desire that I have for our young people is that they learn how to communicate with each other. And that means they have to learn to speak different languages. They have to interact with people from all over the place. And I think one of the greatest gifts I was given as a kid was this opportunity to meet people from all over the world, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Orthodox Christian, Catholic, atheist. And we had to interact with each other and learn that we're each human beings, and how do we get along and really work for the common good. And that's really what I want for our young people in our public schools today, for every single young person.
Yeah, excellent. And you mentioned public schools, so some of our viewers may not be familiar with what exactly a Washington State Superintendent of Public Schools is, or what they do. If you could tell us just a little bit about what that role is for folks.
Sure, it's interesting. I don't know that there is an actual rule book for that job. So I just read an article that whoever runs that office kind of decides the role of the state superintendent. But how I choose to define it after having worked for 2 different state superintendents is I need to be the primary advocate with both the federal and the state governments to make sure that we are getting what we need for public education. But I would say even more importantly than that, I need to be a visionary. We haven't had a visionary in this role for a very long time. And I believe that when we have no vision, we end up nowhere. And so I believe my greatest role is how do I gather experts, and that includes parents and students, to really craft a vision, a plan, a roadmap for our state, so that as we're making decisions, the people of our state have crafted this roadmap for where we want public education to go. And I think that's really been absent. And so state lawmakers are making decisions every day without a roadmap, just chucking spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks and what doesn't. And what I know as a mom and as an educator is that that's not good for any of us.
Yeah, I'm curious what some of the things that you think you and others have identified that are issues / problems that we have identified, but we haven't figured out how to solve. And then I'm also curious about what you think we're doing right as on the educational front. I know we may be lacking vision, and the execution has been lacking. Are there things that we are executing well, and how so?
Yeah, it's funny. I talk about myself as a treasure hunter. So I think one of the things we haven't done well as a state is really hunt for the treasures, because there are tons of them. I have spent the last year and a half traveling across the state looking for treasures, and there's a tiny little district called Bridgeport, Washington, 97% ELL, 97% free and reduced lunch. The average kid there lives 3 Latino families to 1 single wide trailer home, and yet they're graduating 95% or better of their student population. Every single kid takes 1 AP class at least. Out of their graduating class last year of 47 kids, I want to say 4 of them graduated also with their AA degrees, and over half had taken more than 1 AP class. And so I look at examples like that and I say, you know what, if it can be done there, why can't it be done in Seattle? Why can't it be done in Federal Way? There are examples of great models of school across our state, but because we don't tell the stories, people have no idea they exist. And so that's really what I want to do, is instead of talking about where we're broken, because I think we do a lot of that, we talk about a lot about how education is broken. I believe we focus on what we talk about. So I want to focus on what's working well and highlight those things that are working well. And I also want to focus on equity. We haven't had anyone in this office who can really talk about equity, and equity is something that I'm really passionate about. My whole teaching career in this state was in Title I, high poverty, very diverse schools, and I close gaps in my classroom. In our building, we close gaps. So it absolutely can be done, and it must be done. And we have hundreds of thousands of kids who absolutely depend on us doing the right work for them. And one of my mottos, the reason that I run, is that zip code, race, and home language can no longer be the greatest predictors of the kinds of school experiences our kids have. And I absolutely believe there are solutions to that, but we have to have the political will, and as a state agency, provide the kind of support that's necessary to do that work.
Yeah, I've always found it curious whether we're talking about college or we're talking about the K through 12 process. The idea that if your parents were not successful, that we should limit the quality of your education, and
Yeah.
the floor will be extremely low. That always seemed like a perplexing idea to me. And then it's almost hard to argue or to discuss with somebody who then points to a dirt-floored classroom in Africa, like raising money for desks, performing well in those conditions, and saying, well, what's wrong with these students? And I think that there's so much going on there that it needs so much unpacking. I don't think we have time for all of it today or anything, but I think you really captured a very important sentiment there, and I'm glad that you touched on that.
Yeah, it's critical. I think it's funny, we talk about being progressive in the state, and yet there's so many ways that we're not progressive. And I think one of the dangers of Washington State is we like to think we're colorblind, we like to think we're better than the South, and yet in many ways we're far behind. And we need to acknowledge our weakness. We need to acknowledge our bias and prejudice. We're not going to get beyond it until we can own it and address it.
Absolutely. And I know as far as some of the things that are going on in our state currently to address some of these issues that have gotten definitely a lot of attention from both sides are charter schools. And I don't know if you happen to catch it, but there was a piece on John Oliver recently about
Yes.
charter schools, and there's obviously been a lot of flack going both ways about it. I'm curious if you could elaborate a bit to us about your opinions on where charter schools fit into your vision of the future, as you were mentioning earlier.
Well, to be honest, it pains me a little bit that we've spent so many billions of dollars for and against charter schools, because in our state it's about 100 kids to 1,000 kids, and I feel like it's distracted us from the 1.5 million other kids that are in our state. As a private citizen, I voted against charter schools because I felt like if we're not fully funding the schools that currently exist, charter schools shouldn't even be on the table. That being said, we have to acknowledge that in our large urban centers, we are not serving our Black and brown children well. And so I don't believe charter schools are the answer, but I do believe we've got to try some new models. And I think, having worked in Tacoma public schools for almost 7 years of my career, we are doing some great things there with innovation in the context of our public school system. We have a School of the Arts, we have a School of Math and Science, we have 2 Montessori academies, we're opening an engineering school next week, I think. We've done some really great work, and we are graduating students at higher rates than any other school, and the same demographics of our school district. And we have more students of color in our district than white students. So I have to be the treasure hunter. Where are the models that are already working? Why would we set up brand new systems if we do have models that are working? Let's replicate those models, tell those stories, give people a roadmap for how to do that work well. But I think we can't just say hell no to charter schools and not have an option for the students that we're not serving. So my message has been yes to innovation. Let's make sure that we hold ourselves accountable, and let's make sure that we really focus on making sure that all students get support, not just 1,000 students. But I think the whole charter school conversation has sucked up so much of the energy and attention, and it's really to the detriment of the 1.1 million kids that exist in the state that aren't getting any attention at all.
And I think the underlying, if I'm reading between the lines there correctly, is that charter schools are not the solution. They at best they may be an experimental location to try a new model, but the idea that it's a long-term solution or that they're going to be a large supplement is faulty, as you would see it.
At best,
okay.
Correct. Yes.
And I think we're going to have an opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and bring on some more folks if you can stick with us for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I know, as we talked about, Michael Webwine has a slightly different perspective on charter schools, so I'm going to let him, if Michael's ready there. Sorry about that. I always get confused between the two, sorry. He's going to join us and possibly take a slightly different angle and talk a little bit about innovation in schools, which I think is also an important aspect. So it looks like we're ready to get you on there, and go ahead when you're ready, Mike. I don't think we're getting audio, it seems. I don't know if your mic is not selected correctly there. We'll sort that out briefly, but we also had I know Eric wanted to get in here and speak also, so while we sort out the audio issues with Michael, we'll bring Eric on briefly here. Go ahead, Eric. And I think it might be on Dave's side now.
No, do we good?
Okay, no, okay, right.
No, that was me. That was me.
Right.
Don't blame Dave. Blame it on the rain. So I just wanted to thank Erin for joining us. As you know, and I kind of talked to you a little bit, Erin, about this. I have a 10-year-old son, so education is obviously very important to me, and just so happens that he is interracial. And so I was wondering what kind of things you think should be done to serve those types of students. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story that he experienced at school, and something that's been kind of going on. And it's kind of hard for me to talk to him about it because I'm very, very, very fair-skinned. So he basically had a student come up to him and kind of start making fun of him for not being white. So now he's had this big thing where he always tries to prove that he's half white to everybody. And he'll like pull up his shirt and show that his stomach's wider than his arms, pull up his pants shorts, and he is at a, I consider it pretty progressive school, but it still doesn't seem like they've squashed this kind of element from the schooling. I was just wondering if you had any kind of ideas on addressing those type of situations in schools and how to better serve children and students of color.
I got lots of ideas. I mean, I have spent 20 hours in the last 3 days training teachers on how to serve students of color. So I'm running for office, but I'm also teaching teachers because I think it's important. It's that important to me. Here's the interesting thing about Pierce County. So Pierce County, South King County has the largest number of biracial students in the country, primarily because of Joint Base Lewis McChord. And so what that means is we have all these students that nobody has ever really addressed before. And as you know, as a white dad, you don't understand his experience, nor would his mom as a black woman, because neither one of you are biracial. And so what I found as a biracial teacher when I taught in Tacoma is I was the very first biracial adult any of these young people had met before. And so I had a unique perspective for them on, you know what, I'm not all black and I'm not all white. I'm nothing and I'm everything. That's what I used to tell my students. I used to write poetry about this. I am nothing and I'm everything all at the same time. I train teachers on this stuff because we have got to, I think one of the dangers of Washington State is we don't like to talk about race. We like to think we're post-racial out here. And the reality is we're so far from post-racial. Just look at our discipline data and then tell me we're post-racial. I mean, you look at our justice data, our incarceration data. We are not a post-racial state. And until we're willing to acknowledge that we have bias and prejudice, we are not going to move ahead. And that's actually how I start every training. I tell everybody in the room, every one of you in this room is prejudiced and biased. And until you're willing to own that, we're not going to move forward. So one of the things that the state has now made mandatory is if you want to become a teacher, you have to take cultural competence training. Here's the challenge, though. None of the professors were trained. So you can mandate that, but the professors in the teacher colleges weren't trained. So there were 8 of us who were seen as experts. I wouldn't call myself an expert exactly, but we had to go and train the professors who were going to train the teachers. But the reality is in our state, we don't have a whole lot of people who can provide that training, but I believe it's absolutely critical. If we are colorblind, we are not going to serve our students well. Being colorblind is an asset. That's not a good thing. And really helping our educators understand that part of being an effective educator is acknowledging our difference and celebrating. I don't want to be tolerated. Don't just tolerate me. I want to be embraced and valued. Every 10-year-old wants to be valued, wants to know that they're special, that they have value, that they have meaning.
You guys hear me now?
Oh, Michael looks like he's joining in with us. Yeah, we hear you, Mike.
All right, sorry.
So a little bit of background on Mike for you, Erin. He's also has a show within the Progressive Army called Louisa Project 2027, and his show focuses on education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And he's a really intellectual mind and knows a lot about education and has a lot to say about education. But I guess he still needs to get in. Is he on?
I'm here. I turned my camera off. I don't know
what's
going on.
His voice is there.
We got his voice. So we were hoping that Michael could come in and talk with us a little bit about education as well. Looks like Dave is getting him queued up. So in the meantime, I guess another thing that I had questions about as a guy that went to an alternative high school. So I think for me, my perspective on alternative high schools is they're almost kind of halfway in between public schools and private schools. So what is kind of your viewpoint on alternative schools? Do you think that they provide a good form of innovation, or do you think that they're kind of I'll be honest with mine. There was a lot of student involvement. Personally, I was the head of our fundraising committee, and I had to raise a lot of money to make things happen for our school that a traditional high school would not have to raise.
Right.
So I was wondering what, like, your opinion on alternative high schools, which are, I guess, for people who don't know, they're sort of like charter schools, but they're run by the public school district. Am I right about that, Erin?
Correct. Yeah. And so, so my son wouldn't have graduated high school without an alternative school. So both my kids, my youngest one went to an alternative middle school that was like a performing arts / gifted education alternative school. And then my older son is severely dysgraphic, and he needed a smaller school environment, so he went to an alternative high school in high school. I think it depends on the district. So I have seen fantastic alternative schools, and then I've seen those alternative schools that are in the worst building in the district that absolutely suck, and the teachers there don't get any support, and they've got all the oldest books that need to be thrown away. So I think it's all about how we invest in them. I've seen alternative schools that have incredible innovation and are doing robotics with kids and have wraparound services for students. If you haven't watched the film Paper Tigers, you need to watch the film Paper Tigers. It is about a school in Walla Walla called Lincoln Alternative School. It was founded by a guy named Jim Sporleader. He was the principal there. And they serve kids that have alcohol, drug dependency issues, abuse, trauma. But all their staff are trauma informed, so they all know how to address the needs of students who have experienced trauma. And they're doing really amazing work. So I think, much like charter schools, they're not all equal. It's really how you choose to invest in those programs or not. And so I think, as state superintendent, what I want to have high quality for every kid. So we have to hold our alternative schools, all schools, to a really high standard, and then provide them with high levels of support.
Excellent. It looks like I think Michael's just about ready to join us there, Michael. Go ahead there. Yes. Go for it.
Great. Hi, Erin. Sorry for the coming in late. I went difficult. I listen to nearly everything you said, and all of it to me is music to my ears. Number one. Number two, I think Richard gave me a little bit too much credit, but I appreciate it. Oddly, we all have a lot in common here. I'm the father of 3 biracial kids, and my oldest son, who's not biracial, has 2 biracial daughters. So we got a lot going on here. And also, I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands.
Oh wow!
Yeah. I spent 6 years in the Netherlands. My favorite city in the world is Maastricht.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So and Praten Beach in Netherlands also.
Yeah, ik ook. Yeah.
Okay, now that's enough of that. So, I guess the biggest question here that always comes to my mind is funding. What do we do about? I don't know how it works in Tacoma, but what do you do about the property tax shortfalls? Right. That's my.
And I think across the country. I mean, one of the things that I was shocked by when I came to the United States is we have baked inequity into the system in how we fund schools. Period. When we fund schools based on property tax, it ensures that those kids who live in high poverty communities will have the least amount of resources. We have baked that into the system, and that has to be called out. We have got to call that out as a country, not just as a state, but as a nation. We need to call that out, that we got to stop asking for Finland results when we're not willing to invest Finland's resources. And for those of you who don't know Finland, they invest incredible amounts in public education, and they have the highest results in the world right now. And we want those kind of results, but we're not willing to invest that kind of resources in schools, and we leave our poor communities out in the cold.
Yes, and we're also not willing to change the way we do things, right? We're not willing to give kids more time off. We're not willing to give give kids longer summers or whatever the case may be. We're not willing to do that, and that's that American mentality of you don't go around the obstacle, you go through the obstacle. That's the American way. That's hurting us as well. Yeah. I mean, this is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say you're right. And I think the United States, we're also not very intentional here. We love to wait until something's failing and then try to fix it instead of being proactive. I mean, one of the things that I love about the Netherlands or Finland or Germany is they're very proactive. I mean, they look, okay, what are the needs of our students? How do we make sure everyone has healthcare, everybody has food, everyone has housing? Here, it's like you got to prove you're failing enough before we'll step in and say, oh, let's find you some Section 8 housing. And we wait until stuff is so far gone before we invest in it. When we end up investing more resources because we haven't done it on the front end.
But I think that's part of the corporatization of education, right? Because we think everything is about financial outcomes as as opposed to the outcomes for the children, which is, you know,
Yes.
an investment, which is another area where we're failing. We don't see it as an investment. We see it as a gift to someone who's going to run off and use it to, I don't know, for whatever.
Right.
Whatever. I don't know what the logic is in not investing in children, no matter where they come from, or who they are.
And one of the things I believe for those rich people, I'm like, you know what? If you would invest in your poor children, we'd have less kids in prison. You'd be spending less money on all the other bad stuff. If we would just invest in those poor kids, you wouldn't have a bunch of older kids going to ER because they didn't get health care in the front end. Rich people could actually get richer if we served the poor well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I often say. I said this in a conversation with Brandon last week. Is that I often tell the conservatives that I spar with around here is that if you wouldn't have to worry about your house getting robbed and all those other things you say you're worried about if you took better care of people, right?
Amen.
A person with a job education is much less likely to rob your house. I mean, it's just a reality. But they're not willing to make that investment, which is, you know, there's a lot playing. There's a lot of things at play there. You know, there's race, there's class, there's education level, there's all kinds of things going on there, and a lot of it is greed. But,
I'd like to hop in here real quick, and sorry, Dave, if I'm doing this to you, but you don't have to get me too much of a shot. You can just single. I'm going to ask them kind of both the question quickly here. So, I know Brandon's mentioned it before, and I know I've thought about it, and others have brought it up. Is the idea of more integration, and you mentioned it talking about growing up in the Netherlands, going to a school with 70 plus languages being spoken, and the power of integrating different folks in not just racially but economically. And so that if some of these rich kids were at these schools that are being underserved, that it would become more real both for those kids and for their parents about what that underservice actually means in real life terms. And is there a feasible way to do something like that, whether it's at a very basic level of like an exchange student program, but interstate or within the state and just between economic areas? Or because I noticed I had a friend way back that came from Germany, and when he told us about the difference in the educational experience, the common theme was, I can't believe that this is what they're teaching at this level. Like, this is stuff I learned in elementary or junior high, and so that gave me insight into the educational system and had me asking questions and made me realize that I was being underserved in the type of education I was being provided, and so on and so forth. So I wonder, could we use an economic version of an exchange student program in some way to try and address some of the issues between the difference in funding?
Well, it's interesting. So there have been several schools that have done that, actually. And I can't remember, there's a TED Talk or a NPR show on an exchange that was done, I think in Illinois somewhere, where they sent all students from an all-black urban school out to the suburban school outside of Chicago. Powerful experience for both sets of kids. They also have done a new research article came out maybe 3 months ago or 4 months ago that talks about the importance of busing and integration, not just racially but socioeconomically, and that's really what's going to improve our schools, is if we have multiple socioeconomic backgrounds in one school system. I also have another, if I could have a wand and just do magic for a day, I would make every state decision maker spend a day in a high poverty school, because my personal opinion is that if you've never experienced it before, if your kids don't, trust me, if you're a senator, your kids never went to a Title I school. I mean, maybe there's one senator and all of the senators and state representatives, but for the most part, these are people whose children never went to that kind of school. So they make decisions based on the kind of school their kids go to, which is fine. My children started school in a Title I school, a failing school. They went to, their second school was also a Title I school, 1,000 kids in an elementary school. My son had to walk half a mile to the portable where his 4th grade class met. I understand this stuff because I had skin in the game. I think too many of our decision makers don't have any skin in the game. And so it's easy to push funding off till next year. Oh, we're fine now, because they're fine.
Yeah, and we have viewers from all across the country, and so they might not understand. But I mean, I'm sure in other states there's also issues about lottery being presented as an opportunity to fund education and then getting dumped into a general fund to be used basically as they see fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not even that the money isn't there, it's that basically they reallocate it, took it, whatever phrasing one chooses to use, but like the funding was created and we had an idea, and the funding just didn't end up going where we were told it was going to end up. And so there's a larger issue going on there, which is unfortunate. And I know it's happening in Washington and probably several other states, but I'm glad to hear that you mentioned those programs are happening in elsewhere. I wonder what we can do to help try to ramp those up or to expose their effectiveness.
Again, it's about treasure hunting, though. We got to tell that story at the state level. We got to tell those stories so that other people who are brave can try to do the same thing.
And I know one thing that I find as an interesting opportunity of possibly some intersectional overlap is, I know Michael talks about how entrepreneurship and innovation in education can also be a bridge between racial and socioeconomic demographics, and that we can create common goals of in a commerce type of way, but centered around effectively helping each other and just making sure that it's self-sustaining rather than profitable per se. And so if you two would like to discuss a little bit about that, I'd be curious to hear your guys, where you see entrepreneurship and
go ahead, Michael. I talked a lot.
All right. I was enjoying listening to you guys. For me, for instance, in our show, we like to say we're crowdsourcing ideas. Like, one of the things that we're based on, we're starting off small, but we firmly believe that a lot of the answers are with the communities that are going through these issues, the people that have the skin in the game.
Yeah.
I don't think the answers we need are going to come from on high, whether that be some major corporation, the Gates Foundation. I don't think that's where those answers are going to come from. I think those answers are going to come from the people who are going through it, the people with skin in the game, the people who are physically, emotionally, and socially embedded in these problems, right, or in these concerns. So what we try to do on our show, we try to reach out and give people the skills and the information to try to solve these problems, right? If you have an idea, or if you're a startup or whatever, if you have an idea that you can think can help our education system, we're more than willing to listen. And I think crowdsourcing the crowdsourcing that in that way is a big part of how we're going to fix a lot of our problems. That's just from our point of view.
I know for me personally, what comes to my mind between these topics that we're discussing, that the event that comes to my mind is when I was in grade school, about second or third grade, I started playing Pogs. And for people not familiar, Pogs, small circular cardboard thing, and the game was played by hitting it with a heavy thing, and if you knocked them over face up, face down, the more you collected, you would win. And then for the high stakes kids, we would play for keeps. And so I started, people wanted to play, but they couldn't get access to Pogs, so I started selling the Pogs at school during lunch.
Hustling.
Yeah, I was hustling. And so that's what I was doing, and I got shut down. The teachers and the administrative kids were complaining that they were spending their money on it, and I understand having to get shut down because of the logistics of, but there was no follow-up about, well, how do we transition that into something that's positive, something that's not going to be against the rules, something that's going to
sell them in the lunch or to help.
Something. I mean, is it part of a fundraiser, or what do we have to do in order to take that and utilize it? And so I think if there's one thing I would like to add to the education system is taking, especially when we run into troubled youth or people that are getting into trouble, it's often that they have something else going on and they're actually trying to get some attention to what they would rather be doing, except they're focused on whatever is disrupting their life in one way or the other. And so, like, if we can capture the folks that we look at as problems, and this touches on the differential in punishment in education between black and white students, that's kind of the approach that we try to take towards white students that are struggling with issues, or whatever phrasing that is more commonly used with white students than it is with troublemaker, thug kid, whatever else it is with students of color often. And so I think that to me is one really big thing that really captures both the discipline issue and then connecting with folks of color. Go ahead.
So I want to give an example if I can. So in 2006, my family and I, our big Black family, moved to Spokane, Washington. So for those of you who don't live in Washington State, 92% white. Yeah, it's not a very diverse community, and we had lived on the east side of Tacoma, very diverse. And I ended up getting a job teaching at the high school. That school, there's always that school in the community, and it was that school, the one that nobody wanted to be at. But I wanted to be there because those were the kids. I love those kind of kids. So my first year there, it's probably about halfway through the year, and I see a young Black kid, but tall, 6'4". He can't hide anywhere. He's standing near his locker with about 8 other kids around him, and I can tell he's dealing drugs. I didn't actually see the drugs, but I had been around drug dealers before. I'd worked with gangs before, so I recognized kind of the behavior. And I waited until the lunch bell rang, and he stayed at his locker, messing with his locker, and all the other kids disappeared. And I walked over to him and I said, you know what? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not turning you in today. I'm going to challenge you today. I know what you're doing, and I need you to step up and be a leader and lead the rest of these kids to college, not to jail. And he said, what? Lead people? I said, you just led a bunch of kids to destruction right now at lunch. I'm challenging you to step it up and lead kids to college. And this one tear down his face, big Black kid, he said, you think I'm a leader? I said, yes, I have no doubt that you're a leader. I just watched you lead people. You're a leader. So it turns out his mom was dying of cancer in Seattle. His dad had brought him out to Spokane to get away from some gang kids, and he came out to Spokane, and his dad ended up in jail. So here's a kid selling drugs, not because he wanted to be a bad kid, but because he needed to pay his mom's doctor bills, and he was paying the mortgage on the house and for all the food that he was eating. That young man today finished college at Whitworth University last year and became the general manager for Ashley Home Furniture. And I believe it was all not just because of me, but because instead of assuming he was a bad kid, I asked him why. And that's what I want to push our education system to get to, is when you see kids behaving in a way that's not appropriate at school, instead of just disciplining them and kicking them out or sending them into some ISS room, you need to ask why. And then our job as the adults is to make sure we answer that why question and give them the support they need to be their best selves. Because I believe every kid has the same potential he did.
That's an excellent story, and I think that captures it quite well.
Brandon, jump in here.
Go ahead.
Let's let Brandon jump in here. Look, he's a real education expert.
I'll get Brandon in just a moment. I did want to just mention quickly, because we are going to have Chris Reichdahl on, I believe, next week, and so I did want to give you the opportunity to kind of not to just like take shots at him or anything, but to just kind of give us some information about what it is that separates the two of you, why one of you would be a better candidate, and more importantly, what I want to know is, regardless of which of you wins, how can you work together to do the types of things that we were talking about earlier?
Well, I mean, here's the biggest difference. I have spent my entire adult life serving young people, whether it's in school as a basketball coach. I mean, I've spent most of my career in K-12 education. I didn't do other stuff. This is what I've done. I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician running for political office. I'm an educator running for office. And I believe that's the greatest distinction. He was a teacher for 3 years, 20 years ago. And so does he have some experience in K-12? Yeah, he does. But I would say the position of leading K-12 education should be someone who's led education. I have won awards at every level. At the White House, I've won awards at national level, local level, as a classroom teacher, an instructional coach, an administrator. I have demonstrated excellence at every level. I've closed gaps at every single level that I've worked. And so I believe I've demonstrated that I know what I'm talking about. I've demonstrated that I know how to bring people together from a variety of arenas. And I think my record speaks for itself. I'm the mom of 3 public school educated kids. All 3 of them have learning differences, and we managed to get them all through school and to college. And so I believe I have experience both as an insider and an outsider to do this work well. I've worked on both sides of our state. I have visited with over 70,000 people across our state in the last year and a half. I believe I have my finger on the pulse of our state. and believe I can well represent us. Just to add, I am the first African American woman to run for state office, and so to be first out of 9 people as the first African American woman to run for office is it's humbling.
Wow.
It's humbling, and I know that what I represent is bigger than just this office. It's when I march in parades in Southeast Seattle and people are yelling from their rooftops and they want to take selfies, I realize that what I represent is hope for a generation that has not seen a leader who looks like them. I wear my hair like this intentionally because I want our young women to see that they can be beautiful just the way they are, just the way it grows out of their head, and I'm really intentional about that, and I think we need an authentic leader with a vision for all children, not just some children, and someone who's demonstrated they've been effective with all children and with educators.
I think that's a really well-made case. I'm curious. I would like to know. I'll let everybody in, and then we'll finish with thoughts about how, regardless of how the election turns out, that how we can work together in the theme of the concept of our revolution. Different folks. We're lucky in Washington where we're actually in a top 2, so we're talking about 2 different Democrats running for the same position, as opposed to her opponent isn't a Republican, for those that may not be aware of Washington and how it functions, I believe. And so we will go ahead and Brandon, were you ready to get in here?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm
Please.
totally ready. Let me just say I admire your afro. I can't pull off the look because it makes my face look just so huge and fat. But you rock it very well. I can't. It's a great place to store stuff, though.
It is. You never know what's hiding in it.
Only Brandon.
Mike wouldn't know anything about that. Mike wouldn't know anything about storing stuff in his hair now, would he? No. Okay. Okay. No more joking around. So yeah, I've been listening to everything you guys have been talking about so far, and I'm a PhD student, so what I study is education and the intersection between politics and education and communities, and basically how we can get communities more engaged in public education. And so, my question, or what I've been thinking as I've been listening to all of this, is that, we're as a culture, we're suffering from disinvestment both in our Black communities, but also a disinvestment from the public sector altogether. Like we have no faith in public schools, and we've sort of allowed them to be run on this kind of proto-business model where, we expect results very quickly. We expect quarterly, like how can we get people's grades up next quarter? It's like you can't. Like that's not really a fundamental. And we also view education as a vacuum. We're unwilling to engage with the larger structural issues that these children are facing coming into school. And in my mind, that's the difference between school reform and education reform. Like so, how do we engage the community as stakeholders in their own education system? And part of that is all is convincing them that the public sector can experiment. Convincing them that the public sector can innovate in a meaningful way, and you don't have to turn to private investors to get that kind of experience. So my question to you is, as someone who is trying to engage these communities, trying to position them as experts in their own lives, like what kind of barriers do you face in that field? Not necessarily dealing with the other politicians, but how do you make people care about public education when they traditionally has failed them? I'm sure you deal with a lot of parents who public education has failed, and when they grew up, and so they have a negative opinion on it, they don't really value it. So can you speak a little bit about that? Like how do you
Sure.
make?
So I think I have a TED Talk, and I do versions of the TED Talk around the country and in classrooms and in parent meetings. And I think acknowledging the pain of being a parent of color who's been in failing schools. Because my own children, I have my son who's now 19. When he was 8 years old, we knew he was gifted and took him in to have the gifted exam, predominantly white district at the time. And he was told in front of me by the director, your son couldn't possibly have scored this high. He must have cheated on the test. Code for Black boys can't score high on gifted exam. And my son, being Asperger with no filter, said, well, I guess I'll just score higher then. Give me the test again. He's 8 years old. My oldest son, who's 21, when he was 8, was called stupid by a teacher. He's dysgraphic, and his handwriting is very sloppy. That's part of dysgraphia. His handwriting doesn't look any different today than it did when he was 8 years old. And She called him stupid. And I think when I share those stories about how the system has failed me as well, and how we can either complain about the system failing us or we can be part of the solution, that has really inspired people to get on to see that someone in leadership, someone who looks like them, has also, I'm in this because things were perfect for me. I'm in this because partly I have had to fight for my own children's success in school, and I'm all about being involved in providing solutions to the problem. And I think that has really resonated for folks. And I'm also very intentional about trying to get into the non-political spaces, the spaces where people don't vote because they've never had anything to vote for, or they feel like their voices have been silenced. I'm really intentional about getting into those spaces and telling people, I want to hear from you. I need to hear your stories. I need you to believe that your stories matter and that your voices matter. And I think that's a really unique way to go about this political process. My opponent is not doing that. He's in the same political spaces that all the other folks are in. I am very intentional about getting out of those spaces and into spaces where people aren't even voting. I'm not in this room to get a vote today. I'm in this room to listen to you and to remind you that your voices matter and that your message absolutely must be heard.
So part of what you said earlier that really struck me was the work that you do teaching cultural competency to teachers. So I live in New York City, so I'm sure if you're not aware of New York City, and for our viewers who are not aware of New York City, despite New York City has one of the biggest school districts in the United States,
yes.
But it also has some of the largest discrepancy in educational equality. So we have the worst school district in America, in New York City, if I'm not mistaken. If it hasn't been beaten to the bottom by
it may have been beaten by Seattle, actually.
Yeah, prior to being beaten by Seattle, Bushwick, Brooklyn was the worst school district in America with like a 50% graduation rate, and maybe 2 miles to the west in Park Slope or Upper East Side or whatever, you have one of the best school districts in America, and that speaks to the sort of property tax issue as well. So my question, but at the same time, what I see with a lot of teachers in New York City is this kind of a mirroring of the position we have with cops as well, where you have teachers living in predominantly white neighborhoods who have led predominantly white lives with no black people in their social circles, basically busing themselves into these black communities and sort of teaching the natives, and it's just that sort of gap in empathy where they just don't see these kids as kids. They see them as as a type of just basically foreign to their lives. And I wonder what kind of results have you seen from teaching cultural competency to these teachers, because that's I've had lots of conversations with teachers about just being they just don't understand these kids, and they're very quick to
judge.
To judge, to demonize, to call like their problems excuses. Like, oh, like it's just an excuse. It's like, no, their father was just arrested. Like that's gonna affect how they do in school. And so I just wonder, like, how you have dealt with that in your, what kind of results have you seen when dealing with that?
So it's been pretty incredible. I think, I have this gift of, I was adopted by 2 white people. I'm married to a black man. I've lived in all white neighborhoods and all black neighborhoods and everything in between. I speak 4 languages. I've lived in 3 countries. I've had to navigate between spaces my whole life. And so that is natural for me, navigating between spaces. I'm a ball player, so I played basketball on the streets of Philly with guys who have weapons in their pockets, and I have been to the White House. And so because I've had to navigate and I've had to think about, so what's the code for this space? I realized really quickly that a lot of my white counterparts have never had to navigate. They just walk into the space and the space functions just like it has for them their entire lives. And so one of the most powerful things is getting my white teachers to unpack their own cultures. Because I tell people, your culture is almost like the water you swim in. You don't even know how to describe the water because you've been swimming in it your whole life. And for white people, that works for you. Swimming in water works for you because there's water everywhere. But I'm a turtle. I need air. I need to get on land every once in a while. And that's how I describe to my teachers. And we do this really powerful activity. I did it this morning with my teachers where I have them, it's 4 corners. And I say, okay, if time is important in your house, I need you to get into corner 1. If you're not sure, corner 2. If it depends, corner 3. If time is not important to you, get into corner 4. Well, where do all the brown people go? Either corner 3 or corner 4. It's no matter who I'm with, all the brown people are in corner 3 or corner 4 because Time is a very Western European notion. And when teachers can begin to physically see, oh my gosh, wow, we really do things differently. And when I can get teachers to see that, you know what, being on time is not the right way to be, it is a way to be. When I can get them to acknowledge that their way is not the right way, it is just a way, if I can help them understand that code switching is absolutely necessary, that our young people who live in Black neighborhoods need to be able to speak Ebonics when they go home. You cannot ask them to speak academic English and then go home and speak academic English, so they're going to get beat up by the kids in their block, right? But until we can have those honest conversations about assumptions that people make, I am able to see incredible growth in my teachers once they look in the mirror and acknowledge not only their privilege, but just how much culture impacts every decision they make. And if they don't unpack their culture, they automatically operate in it. And they automatically operate as if their culture is right. When I can help them unpack it and they see, oh, this is just a different way of being, it changes now how they interact with students from different cultures. And in Washington State, where I am on the I-5 corridor, we have anywhere from 100 languages to 150 languages spoken. So it's not just black and white. It is black, it is biracial, it's African from all over Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, all over the Middle East, Southeast Asia. So our diversity is incredible in almost every building from Tacoma to Seattle. And so we have to help people not just unpack how they're addressing black boys, but how are you addressing a boy that just came off the battlefield in the Sudan? This boy is going to have some anger. And it has nothing to do with black or white. It has to do with how he's been socialized. And if our teachers don't understand that, then what they'll see is an angry boy who needs to be kicked out of class, instead of a boy that has been hurt and damaged who needs to be helped and who needs some support and counseling.
Well, so just one more question that relates to teachers. So what I also see is first the dissolution of teachers' unions, who have sort of lost a lot of power, especially post the dissolution of unions in America specifically, but also a lowering of the bar for just teachers in general. I mean, like a lowering of the standard. I know a lot of people who became teachers as a backup plan to something else. So, you speak about Finland and the desire to recruit good teachers and have good teachers, but not really, So, like, how do you I'm not sure how Seattle works, but I know that in New York State there are various drives to recruit teachers from all walks of life. Like, how do we have a more inclusive teaching regime for teachers? One that pays well, but also how can we go about demanding a higher quality of teacher? I think a lot of times we do have great teachers, but sometimes we have unprepared teachers. We have teachers who are unprepared for the role of teacher because they're fresh out of school, they're fresh out of graduate school, they haven't had any real experience teaching. We put them in some of the worst neighborhoods, and it's not a good match. So how do we go about matching the right teachers to the right communities, making sure they are properly prepared, but also sort of not deferring blame from them, because we do have a few teachers who are just not pulling their own weight. Like, how do we demand more from our teachers?
So that's, oh man. First of all, I need to warn you guys that I have to head to Seattle, so I'm gonna have to get off the air pretty soon. But I teach on that, so that is like an hour and a half long answer. I'm gonna try to give a short answer if I can. Number one, Washington State has one of the highest standards for teacher certification in the nation. But what that means is, if you're a white middle class person, you're probably gonna be okay. But for our black and brown folks, especially our English language learners who want to become teachers, we have so many tests that people have to take care of that oftentimes our black and brown folks end up not being able to pass the test. And to be personally honest about this, I don't think a test can tell you what a person is able to teach. So I don't care what the test is. That doesn't tell me that you're going to be good at working with kids in an urban setting. So that's a whole different conversation. I believe there are just as many failing teachers as there are failing business people. So I think the greatest challenge right now for us is that we have not set up a culture where we support people as they're coming into the field. So like you said, research shows, the Gates just did a study. The first year teachers go into our highest poverty, brownest schools. So it's almost like we set them up for failure. As a system, as school districts, we need to be more intentional. Our brand new teachers ought to be going to our highest performing schools, to the kids who least need the support. And that's where they should be trained in how to be teachers. Our most effective teachers should be with our kids who need the most support. And we almost flipped that on its head. My husband is a high school teacher. And the culture in high school is you earn your way to teach AP, the good kids, right? Instead, you should be earning your way to teaching the kids who need the most help. We've got to flip that on its head. We shouldn't have the most expert teachers teaching the kids that actually need the least amount of support. We should have the most expert teachers working with the students who need the most support. But I gotta go, you guys. I'm gonna listen to you all, but I shouldn't be on here while I'm driving. That would be really dangerous. So I'm gonna mute myself. Thank you so much for letting me be on the show today.
No, thank you very much. The pleasure was all ours.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin. And
I like her. I like her afro.
Yeah,
Very-
Erin Jones.
very
You
tight.
can find her at, I believe it is Erin Jones for Congress, is that? Or for
It's not Erin Jones for Congress.
Erin Jones 2016.org.
2016. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Come on, for Congress, Richard. We were just talking about education for an hour and a half.
I know. No. Like, yeah, I was wrapped up in my previous thought, but one of the things that I wanted to mention that one of the things I'm looking forward to talking hopefully more with Erin in the future, and I just kind of to go on the idea of solutions and building off of what Michael was saying and what Brandon was saying, is one of the key components about making these types of changes is going to be getting people engaged, getting people involved. Like in Erin's election, a little over 1 million people voted. There are several more million voters in Washington State. So a significant portion of the people deciding who's going to lead in education for our state or who's going to lead in Congress or who's going to lead in Senate or wherever it may be just aren't showing up. And why they aren't showing up is a large and deep issue, but I think that on a long-term basis, it's critically important that we address that aspect of the system that we're engaged with. That it's not uncommon for people to have complaints about education, but it's very common for people to not know who's in charge of making those types of decisions for them, for the district, for the state, and what their potential to influence those people actually is. And on that note, I've been working and talking with some folks about a variety of things, but to sum it up, I have a proposal that I plan on bringing in more detail to Erin in the future, ideally as in her new role as superintendent, but essentially working with students to get them engaged in the political process. And the innovative way that I wanted to do it was by utilizing the entire K through 12 system to begin providing polling for local politicians, and then also potentially coordinating with schools across the country in order to do national polling. And it may start with issues that are popular for our revolution. It may start with local politicians. It may start with a variety of different things. But essentially how it works is you can have some of the younger students go out with a parent or in pairs or whatever, deliver paper surveys or paper surveys for the polling, and then they collect them. Then you have junior high and high school students processing them, and hopefully, ideally, with some inexpensive hardware solutions for laptops, essentially, be able to develop their own code to understand how to interpret and to utilize those numbers, and then be able to present them and sustain it through the funding that would be provided by the money that would normally be going to a Gallup or a Pew or one of those organizations that are increasingly losing trust anyway. So putting it in the public hands and in the local people that those polls are asking about, I think will have a variety of positive impacts. And there's a lot more to expand on from there. We're in the last half hour, so I just want to just generally open it up for discussions about what we talked about today, or if anything might have popped up in headlines since we've been on air, or anything like that. So with that, I'll go to Brandon. Looks like he's ready to say something.
Oh yeah, well, I think Erin hit the nail on the head when and you also touched on it right there as well when she talked about the way we do politics in America. And I think that the way we do politics in America is very reactionary. It's very crisis oriented. We don't understand how to engage with the political mechanism in a long-term way. And that is what education demands. When you're talking about education, you're talking about generational projects. You're talking about, like, not what do we want, to happen in 1 year. We're talking about what do we want our adults to look like in 18 years? Like, what do we want our voting base to look like in 25 years? Like, what do we want our business people to be, engaging with in the future? And that doesn't fit in very well with our sort of individualist, private industry oriented model for everything. We have made everything into a private business model. Everything is based on a private business model, to the point in which it becomes very hard for people to engage with the notion of, well, you have a kindergartner and you need to get them to grade 12 and have them be prepared for being an adult. And what does an adult look like? And that a lot of us aren't prepared to have that conversation. A lot of us don't know what we want. Like, not only do we not know a goal, forget the goal. We don't know a legitimate goal for us. And we don't know, as again Erin points out quite eloquently, we don't know a legitimate procedure to get to that goal. We can't even agree on what we should be doing to get to that goal in a, and not necessarily the most expedient way, but the most equitable way, the way that provides the most opportunities to the most people. And that was one of the reasons why I was so critical of the idea of a free college program. Because I've taught at the college level, and in my opinion, waiting to that level to give people sort of a free, equitable education is nonsense. Like you've already alienated so many kids by the time you get to age 18 that when people talk about a college being too expensive, they're not really talking about the actual cost of college. They're talking that's just coded language for, I don't think I can do well. I've been in a system that has beat me down for 12 years. Why would I want to keep being in a system that beats me down? It's not. We have to start these projects. We have to have these progressive generational projects again. We don't do that anymore. We don't have these big grand American projects anymore. We're talking about infrastructure, building roads or bridges, or just building generations. Now, when was the last time we saw sweeping educational reform that wasn't garbage? Don't mention No Child Left Behind or ESSA. I'm talking about the forced integration of schools. I'm talking about demanding that we have the Disability Act, making our schools are able to deal with disabled kids or kids who have learning disabilities or differences. I'm talking about transgender law that's being federally mandated. We're not doing this the way we used to, and I think a lot of it has to do with the devaluation of the public sector.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And it seemed like Michael, you were trying to get in here.
No, I was. Well, we can argue the free college thing for another day. I can see how it exacerbates the distance as it exists already. So the kids that are prepared to go to that free college will go to that free college and expand that distance. I get that, but there are kids out there who could. There are a lot of young people that could benefit from that. There are a lot of adults that could benefit from that, but there is some foundational fixing that needs to be done at the K through 12 level, pre-K through 12 level, which I agree with 100%. But I think one of the major issues that we face is, I put it in I mentioned it in the chat, is that we have a social distance crisis in our country, and it's based on our housing policy, right? Which of course impacts our education policy, as we spoke about it before, right? And all these politicians, many of them are children of privilege, right? So they have the widest social distance from the people that need the help the most. And I think we're losing track of the fact that social distance exists, and I think losing track is bad. Term. I think we're as a culture we're deciding this is the new normal and this is the way things are going to be. Right?
Yeah, actually, on that note, there was and kind of biggie on the college thing, is I was watching CNN early. I think I want to say it was this morning, and they were explaining, well, the average parents save $3,000 per year for college, and that's the median amount. And then they immediately follow, but only half of people are saving. Roughly half of people are saving. Of that, the median amount is $3,000, and that $3,000 is estimated to be about a third of what they're going to cost. $3,000 per year. is estimated to be about a third of what it's going to cost to send those kids to college. And they were talking about how, well, there's these investment vehicles that you can use to pay for the college, and you have to get, if you get into them and you find the right one, you can, and it's just, that seems absurd to me on its face. That, you know,
That's an investment vehicle. It can always go wrong. Yeah, it's horrible.
I mean, from that perspective, I mean, I think we have a very complex intersectional problem going on here. Because so at a certain point, even if so, Chuck Schumer sent his kids to the exact same middle school that I went to for a year. And at a certain point, you know, if you have a good home life, if you can afford outside tutoring, if you can afford these things, going to like a lower tier school is not going to make you can still do well. Like, you can still do well in a failing school if you have a succeeding family, if you're part of a succeeding, you know, socioeconomic class. Just like if you're part of a failing socioeconomic class, a neglected one, a disenfranchised one, you can still do poorly in a very wealthy school. And so, I mean, that's why I talk about attacking this from all sides and engaging with all of the, you know, all the pieces of this, and not pretending like education is somehow a vacuum from all other aspects of social life. Most of the learning you do is going to be outside of school. You know, most of the things that you learn are going to be with your friends, with your family, with your social groups, with your, you know, your church, your baseball team. That's where you're going to do most of your learning. We have schools to sort of even that playing field for a lot of people. So theoretically we have schools so you can even that playing field, so you're not stuck in whatever socioeconomic class that you're born into. You have the opportunity to better yourself through education. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. Unfortunately, it acts as like sort of this false meritocratic system where we put kids who are most vulnerable to the notion that they are somehow inherently less worthy of something. We put them in schools that are not designed. We put them in schools that are bad, whose material structure reflects the racist system. We give them a curriculum that doesn't reflect their values or their history or their struggles. And then when they do bad in those situations, it just reaffirms the stereotype we already had for them. It reaffirms the prejudice we already had for them, and it makes them internalize that, well, I was given this chance, I was put in this field and I failed. And it's like, you were never expected to succeed. You know, we talk about like why people can't accept that if we just improve the education system for the poor, like how crime would go down. It's because that's not the way they're seeing the world. They've already decided that these people are criminals. And the education system that exists in these communities only seeks to reaffirm that and to meritocratize that. It's not about giving them a shot. It's about validating what we already believe to be true about them, and to a certain degree. Because racism is built into the brick and mortar of our schools. It's built into the brick and mortar of our curriculum.
Yeah, that's one aspect that I feel like in a lot of the racial arguments that have been being generated recently, just whether it be police or just other aspects of how racism affects our lives, is there's some presumption that someday, most people, I guess, point to desegregation, that after the laws were changed, that suddenly this wasn't an issue anymore. Policing wasn't racist. There weren't segregated schools. There wasn't racism, like strong racist problems in the education system. That all of those just someday stopped. And I'm not familiar with what day that was. I missed that day. And so like the idea that we have to go back and reprove the idea that there are there are racial problems in policing or schooling or whatever the field may be, to me seems backwards. It seems that we should first somebody should stand before us and confirm to me that this is when it stopped being that way. And we're talking about what's happened since then.
People point to the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the end of segregation, all these things as the definite end of racism, because it's very easy. It's very easy to point to a law and say, well, this is the closing point on racism. Or they point to Obama and say, well, that's the closing point on race. That's the final frontier. But these more amorphous things, like being able to turn on a TV and like seeing, black people portrayed in a plurality of ways, not just, coming on TV, with an afro. sorry, Erin. Not just coming on TV with an afro or dreads and saying, damn.
I love you.
And I just like it's like
You
know
got,
like
by the way, Erin's
understanding.
still listening on
Yeah,
with
like
us. I just wanted to
understanding.
mention that the audience was very appreciative of your time with us, and they had lots of great things to say about you. So again, thank you, Erin. But go ahead and finish
Yeah,
the rest.
people just want to people want to pretend like they're post-racial. Like if I had $1 for every time I heard someone say I don't see color, I just in critical race theory we call that being like what was it being pre-awakening. Critical race theory does not accept the idea that you can be socialized in American system or Western culture and not see race. It's only you are not aware of the fact that you see race, and that can be worse than being aware of your prejudice I mean, it is worse than being aware of your prejudice because at that point you are resistant to the notion that you even see these things. And the same applies for gender. Some people say they don't see gender, and it comes across as being very just it's a privileged mentality. You don't see race because it doesn't play a role in your life. It's not that you don't see race because it doesn't play a role in anyone else's life. You don't see race because it doesn't play a role in your life. The ability to deny race as a contributing factor is either an issue of white privilege or wealthy privilege. There's plenty of black people out there whose wealth insulates them from racism. We call them Oprah, and occasionally they have problems of racism, but they are
story and headlines for a week. And
yeah, because someone called them the N-word.
Oprah, we better call somebody.
And yeah, someone called them.
Nobody called me from when people were racist to me.
No one's ever racist to you. Everyone loves people with dreads. Did you see Cool Running? Everyone loved that.
But a lot of people, that's what drives them to make money, to get that distance from racism, right? You strive to be in an environment where race matters less. At least you think it matters less.
You get confronted with it in less overt ways until you're at that one party and somebody, had one too many drinks and the white party person comes out, not the, integrated party person, and you catch something or overhear a conversation about what's really motivating something.
No, you overhear the conversation. Well, it's only offensive with a hard R. That's what you hear. You hear it's not offensive if you just use the hard R. And you're like, what? Like what? Because that's always the conversation you overhear. It's just like, well, if it's just with an A or a UH, it's fine. But when it ends in the R, that's when it's the offensive version. But I think that at some point we need to have an integrated conversation. We can't just keep talking about police brutality when black children and brown children are being brutalized in so many different ways. They're being brutalized by the school system. They're being brutalized by the healthcare system. They're being brutalized by all of the public services, by the water system, by the water treatment system, and it becomes hard to have that conversation because people just at a certain point I want people to start expanding the conversation beyond black people being shot and choked to death in the streets, because there are so many slow deaths going on of our black and brown communities where just generations after generations are being killed off slowly. And these sort of the black communities are basically proto-reservations. Like they're reservations where we send white services in to attend to them, and then we take them out, and they're left to their own devices.
Yeah, and with even just within just the specifics of policing, there's the concept that it's happening, but it's not that bad, or it's not a racial aspect or any of those things. It's like we've had the DOJ come out of several major cities basically say, yeah, there's a group of Americans in this city that their constitutional and civil rights are being systematically violated, and in response, nobody's going to jail. And that has it has a terroristic effect on people when they find out that even if the DOJ comes in, finds out that you've been systematically violating my rights, not just on an individual basis, but the same cop that I've been seeing, week after week, and's been, stopping and pat me down. I'm speaking hypothetically, but like that person, that even if the DOJ pinpoints that specific instance and finds that my rights were getting trampled, nothing.
I'm gonna disagree with you. For your rights to be trampled, you have to be a human, and that may sound bad, but there is a very big, or not big, there's a very subtle underlying argument going around America with whether or not brown people, whether or not immigrants, whether or not poor people are actually deserving of human rights. And we don't say it that way, but that's really the conversation, because we can forget school reform. We can barely agree with whether black people should be shot in the streets for selling bootleg CDs. And I mean, first of all, who's even buying bootleg CDs in 2016? That's the underlying news story, because everyone pirates everything or uses Spotify. But that just tells you that's really evidence of how,
Selling his
the
CDs. That was his
systematic, yeah, the systematic disinvestment from the black community is the fact that black people still use CDs. Now, and probably AOL. That's really what we should be learning. That if you tell your kids that, hey, blacks have it so bad they're using cassette tapes in 2016. And I'm being flippant, but to a certain extent, we have to understand that and this goes back to education. We've created a certain set of circumstances where if you don't meet these expectations, you barely qualify as human, and you deserve anything that happens to you. And we pretend like those expectations are, related to education and on all these sort of metrics that we can test, but really it's an issue of racism. These metrics exist to reaffirm things that we already believe and then justify the way people are treated. So we can say, hey, you know what, police brutality, they deserve it. There's a punishment. They were going to do something. Look how bad the community is. Look how bad that person is. He's already been to jail. And talking about education again, I should have asked Erin this question when she was on. We've also narrowed the field for what constitutes success in education. It's STEM. If you are not a STEM major, if you don't do well in math, science, technology, education, which I will say, it's one of those subjects that it's hardest to teach, especially if you don't have a good grasp on it yourself. So when you put, new teachers, less qualified teachers in black and brown communities, they have less of a chance to do well in these fields that we have said you have to do well and to succeed. Forget if they do well in art or whatever. That's not what it takes to succeed. We have narrowed what constitutes success, and we have said that if you don't succeed in STEM, you deserve what happens to you. You deserve to be unemployed. You deserve to be, impoverished because you failed. And that comes down to.
I was just going to say we have April Sanchez in chat who's mentioned that the people are being seen as a commodity, and I think that's long been a trend that we've been increasingly moving towards. That we're cogs in a wheel, we're machine parts, and the problem with our education system is that we're not putting out good parts. And if people were just more conducive to filling those slots, then we would all be better off. When the reality is, one, we're working towards automation, so that there's just not going to be enough jobs long term.
Absolutely.
Creating jobs isn't a long-term solution. It's a short-term bridge until we figure out what we're going to do with people who don't have to work in order to do the basic things that we've used to get jobs for so long. When we don't need garbage men because it's all automated, and when we don't need taxi drivers, when we don't need a variety of different folks, we can't just try to create new jobs for them. We have to have a solution, a social solution that results in people having endeavors that help us as a species move forward, but may not be profitable under the traditional sense.
Not only that, but we were also fed the lie that in the 90s that technology would make the difference. That technology would make learning so easy and so fluid, and everyone would do so well once there was an iPad in every classroom. And that's largely been proven to be false. Our kids aren't doing better. Are they more technologically literate than their generation before them? Absolutely. My 9-year-old niece can work an iPad like you've never seen in your goddamn life. But how well she does in school is independent from that, because a lot of that is just watching YouTube videos. And I will say this, I say, STEM fields are viewed as the only legitimate path to success in society. And if you're not in a STEM field, you're a loser. But people have taken that to heart to the point in which, a lot of people for teaching, that's their second option. We have a lot of teachers now who didn't get into the field because they wanted to be teachers. They got into the field because they thought it was a guaranteed job, an easy job, and they kind of just fell into it. I know, I've dated a lot of teachers because I study education, so you end up dating a lot of teachers. And I've dated great teachers and I've dated not so great teachers. I dated a teacher once in upstate New York who one of their students was graduating high school, one of their black students, and she was a white lady, and he didn't want to go to college, and she spent like 2 weeks trying to help him find a job. And to the point which she bought him a barber's kit and got him a barbership apprenticeship at a local barbershop. And she was like, you know what? You're gonna become a barber. He was into that. He wanted to be a barber. You know, like he never had the option to try it. But we have people. No, oh, I'm sorry. Eric wants to speak now. So we can probably
Yeah, like, Eric, I mentioned, I saw that he was trying to get in earlier, and I got distracted, and so Eric, get in here, and then
when I said barber, you touched your hair.
and then go ahead and tag on with final thoughts. Okay,
I'm off. I just want to throw one thing across. I'm sorry, Erin.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Louisa Project 2027. I know you're listening. I see you. Louisa Project 2027. I'm going to send you an email because I'm having a forum on women of color in higher education in September. I'm going to send you an email. All right. And if anybody else out there wants anyone else wants to be involved, please hit me up. Folks, thank you very much for having me there, Project Sanity crew. I'm out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing more about that event you're putting together.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Eric, go ahead. We've been keeping you quiet, holding you down.
Not by choice. All right? I mean, I think it's been an hour. Was that how long Brandon talked? I think so. I think. Anyway, I'm just joking around. He always has great things to say. So I think it's a little past being on topic now, but I wanted to talk about something that I think is very important is art and music in schools. And I think one thing that is very underappreciated about teaching art and music in schools is the fact that these are skills that can be taken outside of school. So instead of a kid going and roaming the streets and getting in trouble, he might be writing a poem, he might be, or she might be drawing a picture and using their creative mind to stay out of trouble. And that's really the kind of program that after they get out of school, they don't need to be moderated, and it keeps them busy. And I think I might have a little bit of bias to that as a former musician. But I really have noticed since I was in elementary school, and now watching my son, who's now in elementary school, actually he's almost in middle school. Wait, what? Really? Anyway, so I've noticed that just these different arts and culture and music classes have just almost gone away with. I ask him all the time. I'm like, hey, have you done any music classes? And his school doesn't even have band. And his mom lives in a middle class area, so he's actually going to a pretty well funded school, thankfully. But he doesn't really have any music programs. They did this one thing where they had all the kids buy recorders and they taught them a song and had the band come and teach them a song. But that was like the most that I've seen out of any music program. Now, I can remember when I was in elementary school, I was very involved in music. We actually traveled around the state and did different contests, which I won a few of them. I'm just going to throw that in there. But we did these kind of things, and what this did is Richard, you talked about like an economic integration. And sort of like a student exchange program that involved economic class rather than just nationality and origin of birth. And I think that these kind of programs introduces you to people outside of your school district when you're going and doing these contests, when you're playing in these orchestras and you go to some orchestra contests within your state. And I think it's important. I think that this is arts and culture provide another opportunity for diversification and unification, and it brings people out of their comfort zone and has to introduce them to people of different colors, of different social class, of different talents, skills, abilities, intellectual levels. And so I kind of wanted everybody else's thought on the current state of arts and music in schools and what you think about that.
Yeah, I would love to opine. We are pretty much right up against our actually, I guess we could really go on a little bit since we're just doing our own thing.
Yeah, we're on our own channel.
Yeah, we're fine. Yeah, so yeah, we can go on a little bit about that.
Well, I was like, yeah, hell yeah, I just realized.
Yeah, we can go on forever. But I mean, I can speak to that specifically if you want to opine about it. But I have examples I could talk about in terms of arts and music in schools.
Yeah, well, the thing the little piece I just wanted to add is I think that part of that comes from the overall decline in the quality of music and the engagement of music in society in general beyond the educational aspect. And you can't really teach how to make a Britney Spears song in in a real music class as I know it. But sorry,
What?
unfair shot at bringing
Hit
up.
me, baby, one more time.
What are you talking about? Okay, well, the music in the 2000s has been bad. 90s music was great. I miss boy bands. I miss boy bands, and I miss 90s R&B. Like, if we could have, I'm gonna talk that specifically, but a lot of places now have replaced STEM teaching with something called STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So they have added an A to it, and to acknowledge that a real education is a full education. A real education is one that engages all aspects of a developing child's interest. And music and art is an interest that a lot of kids have and should be fostered at a young age. At a young age, and allow them to pursue that to the best of their ability. And I feel it comes back to the idea of like what we're doing in terms of like what qualities we're looking for in our students. And you hear it all the time. Oh, America's 7th in science, or we produce like the 5th in engineering. It's like I don't really, or 12th in math. I'm like, okay, well, I don't actually care about that, because like that's only a really big problem if you sort of default to the notion that America should be first. How about we stop focusing on what we're worst at and say, okay, well, what are we best at? Does America produce the most music? Does it produce the most art? I think it does, probably, right? I think American art and culture, art, music, and culture, in that sort of way, popular culture, in film, stuff like that, is the most widely produced and consumed art in the world. And we have a lot of kids who are good at that sort of thing. And I think this comes down to really engaging with the eccentricities of communities and understanding, not being afraid to experiment at the school level. Like not only do we not need a federal sort of umbrella for what every school should have, we don't even need a state or a city umbrella. We need to really engage with what makes a school in the South Bronx different from a school in Brooklyn, what makes a school in one neighborhood different from a school in another neighborhood. Say, hey, maybe this school in the South Bronx does need an alternative music program that focuses on, sound engineering, not necessarily brass band, but we have a soundboard, we have a recording studio, we have these things. We don't need a full jazz band. We can have an engineering studio, or maybe this school needs a wood shop and another school does not. Really engaging with the community and positioning community members as experts on their own communities. Like at a certain point, we have disallowed for certain types of expertise in the public sector. We've said, okay, well, if you don't come from the business world, you don't know what you're talking about. And of course, my example is New York City, who as opposed to having an elected school board, has an appointed school panel on educational freedom and American excellence, as places do. And it's just made up of business owners, made up of people who have MBAs and who used to work at, Hewlett Packard, as opposed to people who A, have degrees in education, or B, have just been teachers for 50 years. And it comes down to when you go to these meetings, it comes down to how do these people sort of fight to be recognized as experts in education, when the criteria for that seems to be, well, you have to have a degree in business and run a successful business your whole life. When really, what makes you an expert in education in the South Bronx would really be, I've lived in the South Bronx for 20 years, and I've taught in the South Bronx for 20 years, and I have kids in the South Bronx for, 10 years, and so I'm engaged with every aspect of the educational system, like our lovely guest, Erin Jones. And so, a lot of this comes down to being willing to listen to the community when they tell you that they know about the community.
So
yeah, I think that's an important. Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, I just saw something in chat, and I actually think this would be something that might be right up Brandon's wheelhouse. Rochelle said, wasn't there some research saying that music and art can be linked to math, or children can learn math through music and art? Do you know anything about that, Brandon?
Yeah, music specifically has very deep ties in mathematics. Math is a language, and music is a language, and music is measured in meters and pitch, and all those things have mathematical elements of them. So it's not so when people do well in music, a lot of musicians have very, if not high level understandings of mathematics, have they engage in a different type of math. So those skills are transferable to one another. But in a lot of cases, people are self-taught music because schools don't have good music programs. And the people who do have who do teach math are unaware of this particular. They're not willing to bridge this gap in their school. So they're like, we're not willing to have a joint music and math program where people learn like, okay, well, here's how math applies to music, and here's the way you can engage with music from meter and pitch and rhythm to how it applies to mathematics. But you can do the same thing with science. Music is also a wave. You can talk about music in a lot of different ways, and it comes down to teachers being able to engage students, meet them at their level, and say, well, you're interested in this thing. Let me teach you this through this alternative mechanism. So you have a lot. You have a lot of people
who. That's an excellent point that you say is like, let me teach you this through this thing that you're more familiar with, and we just know from research that people are way more likely and way more effectively learning when they're attaching it to things that they are already familiar with, that they already understand.
So for example, they also have done studies in California that show that when you and especially in minority districts, when you teach them more, when you have more classes designed around, cultural studies around the culture they belong to, attendance goes up. People do better when they're learning about their own culture as opposed to American culture, and which has big blanks, American history, which has big blanks in it. So there are lots of ways in which you can engage with students through their own interests, and I think the combination of music and math is one of them. It's one of the more direct ones, but there's also music and cultural studies. There's theater and writing in English. There are so many ways in which you can. So I've taken classes I taught at the university level for a little bit, and I had to take classes in critical pedagogy to learn how to teach. A lot of professors that a lot of professors you had in college, if you went to college, did not know how to teach. I'm just going to tell you that right now. They just knew a lot of information, but they didn't really know how to teach in a really critical way. But when you go to these classes and you take these classes, you're taught that you need to have 3 different ways of teaching the same thing. If the kids don't get the first way, you got to have a second way. If you don't get the second way, you got to have a third way. You got to be able to really hammer these lessons home, so that and meet them where they're at. And that's what any good leader, any good teacher can do. They can meet you where you are and bring you to where they need you to be, and not
when
sort of
when they're capable, both because they're not overly worked, but then also that they're willing to get engaged. When they're capable of building those relationships with their students, they can figure out which those 3 ways are and which ones are going to be the most effective and capture the most people, and they know who's going to get missed every time if they use that one, so that they got to make sure that they go give them a little extra time one-on-one, because the 3 primary methods aren't going to work for them.
Absolutely. And we also have a very rigid structure when it comes to both curriculum and schools. So I know plenty of 18-year-olds who I've had in classes who did not need to be in college yet. They just couldn't. They were not prepared for whatever reason. Either they weren't prepared emotionally, socially, sort of like education wise. They needed more time in the oven to be prepared for college. And a lot of that has to do with teaching school districts being different all over the place, and a lot of it, just the personal development of students. There's no reason why 5th grade needs to be if you weren't born in this year ending in November and this year ending in September, you belong in 5th grade. It's like, that's really not how kids develop at varying rates. And so at the same time, when I was constructing my own classes, I was amazed by how much freedom I got in making my own curriculum. And then I realized how lazy some teachers actually are, professors are at the actual level. Like, you don't need to have tests. Like, I didn't know that until I was designing my own course. At the university level, you don't need tests. It makes it easier. You don't need tests. You don't need essays.
You just have to demonstrate that they've gathered the knowledge or whatever, and you can do that in a variety of ways, but tests are one of the simplest and easiest. You can copy tests from last year. You can do shit, sorts of stuff like that.
It's very easily quantifiable. So my curriculum, it was a class on conflict. And so my grading scheme was always based on some type of fighting. And so all of my assignments were either debates or written rebuttals to something else. So it had to be, you had to engage with each other in some sort of fight. And I was surprised by the fact that stuff was allowed, and it wasn't simply you have to have 3 tests, you have to have 1 final, 1 midterm, written evaluation. Like, I think a lot of people just fall into a pattern because they're afraid of experimenting and failing. But again, that comes down to the unfair expectations we put on teachers as a result of standardized testing lack of protection with teachers union, large class sizes, which make this kind of stuff impossible. So I mean, I can't blame teachers. I have to blame the structure that they are teaching and learning to teach within that makes them unable to really experiment effectively. You know, there's no reason why you need to give 18 tests. Let your kids debate. You know, like have 5 scheduled debates, and if that doesn't work that year, change it up next time. Like there needs to be room for not only schools to innovate, but also teachers. Like teachers need to be able to innovate in their own classroom in a meaningful way, in an informed way. I mean, they can't just be doing anything. But
yeah.
we can't have such a punitive culture towards our teachers and our students. I think a lot of our teachers are scared to death of failing. You know, like they're scared to death of failing and being fired or being reprimanded, and they need to know that that the administration is behind them. That this is not going to be a blame game if one of your kids fail.
Yeah, and I mean, and especially when you get into the middle and high school, where you're getting a variety of kids. Some kids that did fine or excelled in school, and other kids that did horribly and either got a pass because they performed well in sports, or just everybody turned a blind eye and nobody wanted to deal with them, and they just got handed around the educational system and somehow ended up getting into 7th or 8th grade, but without developing any of the types of skills that they were supposed to beforehand. And then the teacher's worried that if I don't, focus on trying to get this one kid up to this level, it'll drag down my average or whatever it may be, or I want to keep that kid out of my classroom, and creates other drama. And there's a lot of different aspects that go into what, especially at the middle and high school, when you look at performance, you definitely have to take a look at what the teacher started with at the beginning of the year and what they end up with at the end of the year. But if they did good teaching, the positive results from that good teaching may not really manifest for several years further down in their educational process.
Well, absolutely, but teaching and learning are just unquantifiable. And it's the idea that we give grades in this country the way we do is so. And I've graded tests. I've graded lots of tests. The idea that we give grades in this country the way we do,
they don't get
until
grades
you
at
grade
Evergreen.
stuff for yourself. Like out of 100, and that's when you realize how arbitrary and meaningless it is. I've had to grade papers where it's like, okay, well, is this a 97 or a 95 or a 96 or a 98? It doesn't matter.
The arbitrariness of it. Yes, I was hoping to talk to us a little bit about the integration.
I'd love to hear Erin Jones' opinion on that, because I'm sure she's graded as well. But you have some kids who are like, well, why'd I get a 97 as opposed to a 98? And you're just like, how the hell should I know? It's just like,
then the next question is what that grade means in the future. Like, if somebody gets a 3.6 versus a 3.7, that may be the difference between them getting into a program. But when those two people, when the entrance department is looking at the two different applications, one person's 3.7 might mean something radically different than another school's 3.6. And so when we look at them like there's some sort of like it's an ERA or something for a pitcher, and it's like that's not how it works.
Another angle when it comes to grading is the way that people look at schools in general. Like I've brought up that I went to the alternative high school, and I had a very high GPA, 3.9. I graduated third in my class. And yeah, it was a small class, but I still had a 3.9 GPA. But colleges still looked at me like, wait, I haven't even heard of your high school. And we're talking in-state colleges. And they definitely frowned upon the fact that I went to an alternative high school. And I agree with what you guys are saying here. And they viewed my 3.9 as a different 3.9 than they might have as Timberline High School, which was right down the road and had an enrollment of like, their graduating class was like the same size as my entire school's enrollment. So they looked at me way different, even though I had a high GPA because of the school I went to. And I think that I don't necessarily agree with Common Core. That's a whole nother thing we can go into at a different time. But I think there should be something to kind of streamline grading standards. I think that is something that could be up for discussion. How do you feel?
I can just
Okay, get
I'm
in
not
here, Dare. Like he's waving us down. Let him in.
So
Talking also.
I really want to get, because we're talking about this idea of grading in colleges and school in general, and as someone who goes to Evergreen State where we don't have grades, my university is putting 90% of students in their first or second choice of graduate school. Sorry for the noise in the background, folks. Sitting here and really trying to understand this idea that grading is frankly pointless. I feel like I've gotten better feedback and done better as a student when a professor takes the time to tell me, hey, this is how I interpreted your, for example, I wrote a research paper, and they take the time to dissect it and tell you, here's what you need to work on and why. This will make this a stronger paper, a weaker paper. Just slapping a number on there and telling me, oh yeah, this is a 94. That doesn't help me as a student, and I don't see the point in doing grades in general. But I do like the move by LSU, for example, where they say, as long as you meet the 3.0 threshold, and while I'd like to get rid of tests like the ACT and ACT, if you hit like a 20 or 30 on your ACT and you have a 3.0 GPA, you're automatically accepted to Louisiana State University. I think that's a better system than this, punishing students that don't test well or something like that, and reflecting that in their GPAs.
Well, I'm not anti-grade and I'm not anti-Common Core. I think that we do need to have, and I'm not even anti the ideas behind No Child Left Behind. Had they been implemented properly, which was to, funnel money towards our most needed schools and our most needed districts, as opposed to just closing them down and, I don't know, crossing your fingers and hoping they do better. What I'm against is the kind of like what is implied by these things, which is that there is a one fit for every student that they should be trying for. That every student needs to be amazing at a very small number of things in order to be worthwhile to our society. And if you're not, you're not. Out of 100 grading is stupid. Like out of 100 grading is absolutely dumb. The schools that you can get over a 4.0 GPA, that's nonsense. Like those schools are nonsense. I guess a nonsense grading scheme. But ultimately, let's get back to the college level. You can tell the kids who come from not so great schools because they are so much less likely to do certain things. That they have harder time working independently. They have harder time working in groups with other students. They don't come to office hours. They keep to themselves. Like they are happy to get whatever, like I said, some kids will fight you over from an A- to an A, and some kids are just happy to get a C. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of issues with help seeking that come from being in these communities, in these districts. And again, I'm going to expand the conversation outside of education. Help seeking as a behavior is so frowned upon and punished within certain communities, like calling the cops and not receiving an adequate amount of help, going to your teachers with your problems and not receiving an adequate amount of empathy. Like these problems have long-term effects with how willing you are to actually seek help from any authority figure, anyone you view as an authority figure in the future. And I tell people all the time, like I watch a lot of Love and Hip Hop Atlanta, and Love and Hip Hop Atlanta had perhaps the best description of black and brown help seeking I've ever heard in my entire life. And it was simply, when you're black, you don't ask anyone for help. You either help yourself or you find God. And that's how you get help. You see it in these students. You see the inability to just come to you for help. Where some students, they'll come to your office hours and sit there for 2 hours and just talk about the class, which is great because whatever, it shows that they're interested and they get extra points for that, for being interested. But a lot of kids, once you get to that college level, the way you engage with the education system is already cemented in your head. No one is being changed I don't think anyone is being changed inherently, or not a meaningful amount of people, by their college experience. I think people are being shaped by their K through 12 experience and probably by their K through 5 experience more than anything else, when it comes to how willing they are to seek help, how likely they are to succeed. And we have to build into our students that it's okay to demand better. Like we want to build into our black and brown community that you can demand better from the state in terms of like the services they provide you with. Like you don't have to just accept what you're given.
which is tough. With meanwhile, we have things like Flint, Michigan, where basically everybody's like, yeah, it's fine if you want to serve poison water to the people. I mean, get around to fixing it sooner or later. It's only been a few years.
Well, and
Yeah, and I mean,
oh, go for it, Brandon.
yeah, but I mean that's just one of the many environmental barriers to education. That's one of the many environmental causes of crime. But I keep going back. We have such a punitive culture. We have such a conservative culture as it relates to crime and success. And by conservative, I mean we view it as individual faults. Like if you fail in education, it's your fault. Maybe it's your teacher's fault. Maybe it's your community, and maybe it's your community or your subculture's fault. So maybe it's the black community's fault for listening to rap music and wearing their pants down low. But it's never the larger society's fault. We don't say, okay, well, 50% of people are failing in Bushwick. That means America has a really big problem. We say, well, that community
yeah,
they
exactly.
listen to, there's too much Ja Rule. There's too much Ja Rule in that community. How can you succeed when you're listening to the murder remix of J-Lo and Ja Rule, I'm Real?
But yeah, I think just Dave's been working long today. I don't know if he's about done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and sorry, I asked him in Slack, but he's been so busy I didn't know. I know he was working on that community garden piece. I don't know if that was ready for this week or not, but I thought maybe he should get a chance to play it if he had it done.
Yeah. There's a there we are.
Absolutely.
There he is.
We should be teaching horticulture in our schools. Like, there's no reason why kids don't have a school garden.
You should ask.
Yes.
Especially in Washington State, there's no reason why kids shouldn't be learning lots of horticulture.
Well, the rich middle school actually here in my city, the richest middle school actually has a greenhouse.
No, I'm not joking. I think that there's.
I'm not joking either.
I'm about teaching kids horticulture. I think that it's like there's so much room for innovative science programs, innovative math programs, innovative music programs, that it's a shame that they're just not. And the teachers are there. Like, I know teachers who teach experimental theater. That they teach theater to help kids, or their other various issues, and they just have a hard time finding jobs because a lot of places they just don't want that. They want you to read Hamlet to them, and it's like that's not what they do.
All right, looks like Dave's got that community garden thing coming together. So go ahead and.
Well, I don't have it's my piece it's going to be a longer piece, but I'm starting to dig into the community gardens here around Los Angeles, and there's a group by the name of Los Angeles Community Garden Council, and they're just two young ladies that manage 40 community gardens throughout Los Angeles and 2 urban farms. And that's one of the things I'll get into, is the difference between a community garden and an urban farm. Did you know there was a difference?
No.
A community garden is like a condo. You lease space, you lease a plot in the garden and to pay for the water and everything. So it's and then it's managed. And so all the plots are sort of leased. Now, an urban farm is actually all volunteer from the community, and people come and they work it, and they get, like, for instance, the one that I was at in Boyle Heights, which I'll be highlighting, what they grow goes to a woman's shelter, as well as some restaurants downtown. There's a local brewery off of LA River that uses hops that they grow. So and there's these 2 young ladies that manage all these 40 community gardens and these 2 farms. And they have a very interesting program going on this Saturday. And I just want to throw it out there as to what's going on, because I found it to be so fascinating. It's Cinema Organica, and it's a film. It's basically a 2-day film contest, a film festival, where you show up, and they're gonna give you a Super 8 camera. You're gonna shoot a Super 8 film right there in 2 hours, and then they're gonna process it with coffee grounds and organic materials from the farm. And then on Sunday night, they're doing a potluck and a screening of all of the films. So a lot of the community is signing up for it. Young people, old people, it's all ages. And people are going to, I found it just to be fascinating that this kind of stuff just doesn't get enough play. It doesn't get enough promotion. So I want to try to promote things like this. I didn't get a chance to get the whole piece together on the community gardens, but I will. Noel, I promise. I'm going to interview you guys. I'm going to try to make it out there Saturday morning and get some of these filmmakers shooting their Super 8 and the process of it just fascinates me with coffee grounds and organic materials. So I just wanted to get that in before we finished up. But it's been a great show today, guys. Our guest Erin was just fantastic guest. Nice work, Adair. Good score
so
on that
thankful
guest.
for Aaron.
That
We'll
was
go ahead
me.
and give some wrapping up words, and then we'll get done with our broadcast here. We started a little late, so it's all right for us to run a little over, and so we'll go. Eric, it sounded like you were about to chime in, so finish that thought, and then closing words, if you would.
Well, I just wanted to, brag a little bit that I first contacted Erin about coming on the show, and Adair redid it not knowing that I already did. Just pointing that out there. But yes, I think it was great to have that conversation with Erin today. I think as a parent, it's always great to have an opportunity, and I think it's a special opportunity to speak with someone who could potentially be the superintendent of your state schools. Going back to the R Revolution thing, I just think that we all need to remember that we need to keep fighting, and that this revolution is ours. Whether Bernie is there or not, it doesn't really matter because it's in our hands now, and we need to keep pushing forward, keep moving on, and keep fighting for change. And that's it, man.
Keep building those communities from the community level up, and don't worry about what the overarching organization is trying to do as far as our revolution is concerned. Brandon, some closing thoughts?
Well, I guess to tie all of this together, I think that what we need to talk about more is community sustainability, the ability for communities to exist within communities. People, so food security, schooling security, like basically for a community to have its own infrastructure that it can maintain by itself without needing constant support from outside governmental programs. I think that in a lot of cases, we're talking about schools in unsustainable communities for a variety of reasons. Going backwards, the sort of BDS movement. I mean, I don't know a lot about the Israel-Palestine situation in any sort of nuanced way, like the way most people will. So I don't really feel as comfortable speaking about it. All I really know that makes me sort of not really want to engage too deeply with it is that you're seeing what you see now, which is the silencing of peaceful protest and disagreement. People are not allowed to be peacefully disagreeing with Israel in any meaningful way, and this hinting at people who disagree with Israel as being inherently anti-Semitic, which is, let's be honest, a code for Nazis. When Israel lobbyists and pro-Israel anti-Palestine people mobilize that word anti-Semitic, like they're mobilizing Holocaust guilt. Like they're not talking about people being generally anti-Semitic, and that's gross. They're comparing anyone who disagrees with Israel to Nazis and Hitler. And if you've been online for any particular length of time, you know that makes your argument really, really weak. And so I guess those are the two things that make me just kind of shy away from that kind of engaging with that very deeply. It's just those two things. And our revolution, it was boring. I expected more. I'm disappointed. I'm not surprised but disappointed.
Yeah, and I think that you captured some good points there, and I think especially about the not being able to peacefully disagree about thing like with Israel, and I think that there's a larger issue of the military-industrial complex benefiting from fomenting never-ending conflict, and it's convenient to have it on the other side of the planet, not in our country. But how long it stays that way, I don't know. But that I think that plays a role along with all the social and economic drivers that are commonly discussed as well. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank Michael for joining us from the Louisa Project 2027. I want to thank Erin Jones again. We're amazing guests. So thankful to have you. Hopefully have you on again in the future. And hopefully at some point as Washington's new superintendent of schools. So with that, I want to thank everybody back here, Eric and Dave behind the scenes, clicking everything, Brandon, Adair working to help set up, get things going earlier, and just a big project coming up later this month, beginning of next month, or excuse me, end of September, before or first days of October. So keep an eye out for that.
Major project.
Major.
Big time.
So make sure to stay tuned, subscribe, share. We'll check out some of the old clips from this past week. There's lots of great stuff in there. Brandon with the Jamu, the VP for the Green Party, is a great little sit down, and there's just lots of great stuff. Ben's on right now, so you can switch over to the Benjamin Dixon channel. I just want to thank him for we're usually on there as well, but we were just having some technical difficulties, and we wanted to get live out there so we can make sure we could speak with Erin as long as possible. So thank you all for joining us. It's been a great episode of Project Sanity, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Keep an eye out for new bits of sanity coming out more frequently. Keep an eye out. Thanks, everyone, and good night.
It ain't easy being green.